Hello, thank you guys so much for joining us. Like, this has been something I've been thinking about doing for, a couple of years now, is like trying to kind of dig into the minds of educators like yourself to kind of just realize what you guys are doing with your programs in your geographical area. We talked a little bit last night at dinner about kind of, I'm going to go down to Texas and do the same thing in Houston and Austin and Dallas and talk to those educators. And I just thought, what can we do to kind of like give some sort of insight to other, younger percussionists that are out there teaching, maybe some music educators that aren't percussionists, that can maybe get a little bit of insight on like how you got to where you were, And I think we found 3 amazing educators with your programs, and you guys have such a brevity of like experience, from middle school to high school, indoor drumline, that whole thing. And I'm just excited to have a conversation just to talk about like where all this came from, where your program is at now, how it started, and talk about what the future is, maybe a little bit about Sabian here and there. But let's just get started. So what we have today is we have Alan Sears, who is a really, really great friend of mine that we've been, friends for a long time. I appreciate, everything that you've done for us at Sabian for sure. But Alan teaches at Sprayberry High School and is also at Kennesaw State University as the percussion director there, and also the founder and still running the drumline at Atlanta Quest, which has 2 drumlines now, right? Like 2. Open and World.
Yep, one open, one
so no rest for Alan for sure. And then here on the center, on the 50-yard line, we have Scott Brown, who has been a longtime Sabian artist, and appreciate everything you've done for us and all your help and insight when it comes to products. And Scott has been an educator how many years? 22 years now. Yeah, so Scott's kind of been there, done that. We can call him the elder of this panel and rely on him for information. But Scott teaches at Dickerson Middle School, which just got accepted to play at PASIC this year, and it's going to be an awesome experience. So we'll talk about that in a little bit as well. And also teaches at Walton High School here in town. And then over here to my right, we have Kevin Kinney, who is kind of new to the Sabian team and just came on, I think, last year.
Yep.
Yeah.
November.
Yeah, I think around November, and that was one of the guys that Alan called me and said, "Mark, if you've ever trusted me in your life, we got to get Kevin on board," and so I'm so happy and so pleased to have Kevin on board, and he's been a huge help already, and teaches at Milton High School, where he has a incredible percussion ensemble, which also has an amazing WGI World group that made finals this year. Congratulations.
Thank you.
First time I think I've ever remember in 28 years now of indoor drumline, I've seen Cage on the floor. So pretty awesome. I was, as an old percussion geek, I was like, this is going to be interesting to see what happens. So very, very incredible, like what you're doing with your kids as well. So let's just jump in and let's just talk about some things that I think that, and whenever anybody wants to talk, just jump in there. But I'll start with you, Alan. The biggest question here is like kind of the idea behind how you start beginners. Like every time I work with other programs, or I talk to other people on the phone, or I talk to music educators, they say, oh, well, like how does Sprayberry do what they're doing, or how does Walton do it, or Milton, like how do they do all this? It's got to start somewhere, right? So like, let's just talk real quick about like, how do you train your beginners? Like, how do you pick who's going to play percussion? Like, is there a rhythm test? Like, what do you guys do in your programs?
Yeah, well, I don't, with high school, I do start a fair amount of beginners. But a lot of times they come to me with pre-existing knowledge sometimes.
Sure.
I'll say that. And we have to clarify a lot of little idiosyncrasies the kids might have. So the first thing I always do when I'm getting the middle school batch in every year, and Scott will be able to talk more about middle school in a minute, but I have to take them and do a complete evaluation of what they already know or what they already think they know, one of those things. And then at Sprayberry, what we do is we split them up into ability groups as soon as they come in. We try to figure out where they're at, what they already know, and what they are really lacking at. And then we designed for each. So we basically have 4 ability groups, 4 levels of what we do, and those first 2 have the curriculum for that changes year to year based on what their needs are. So, an example is the first thing we always do is break down their technique and try to get them to actually hold and move the stick correctly. Because a lot of them already can count somewhat, they already understand rhythm a little bit, but the mechanical operation of their hands are kind of all over the place. So we fundamentally start with technique for all the kids, and we give them a specific exercise program that is going to refine that technique the way we do things, basically.
Now, is that something that you developed, or do you use rudiments or essential elements, or what do you use?
Well, it's something custom for us now. There's a lot of good method books out there, and I really like them, especially at the middle school level when I do, like I say, I don't have a ton. I've done middle school, but not a ton. I like a lot of the books there, but the kids have such specific issues to them. After 3 years we start middle school at 6th grade, we start band in 6th grade here. So after 3 years, sometimes of them being unsupervised in the way they're developing their playing, it's very specific to the kids. So I've just developed our own system and our own little exercises, and some of them are similar to what we would do in the marching band, because I'm a big believer of whether you're playing concert percussion or marching band, chops are chops. Once you can control the stick and play, you're going to be able to do a lot more. So our specific program is something we just designed over the years. I've been there 20 years now. So every year we just take them, we figure out where they're lacking, and then we're lucky enough to have a percussion class in the fall. They don't ever even go into a band class until the spring semester.
But what about Christmas concerts?
We do.
Parents gotta have a Christmas concert.
We do that.
Right?
We'll work on. So we have 3 concert bands, and we'll split the kids up amongst the concert bands. And in the class, we'll go over their material, not a ton, but enough to where they can play it. And then we have 2 or 3 after-school rehearsals getting ready for our fall concert and our winter concert.
Right. Well, let me ask you this, Alan. Your position is a little bit unique to the fact that a lot of times educators will say, well, we can't hire a full-time band director that's a percussionist because we need a woodwind player or we need a brass player. So your schools basically just said, look, there's a need for percussion help, right? And so you're hired out through the boosters, right? And they make that a priority for you to come and teach.
Yes, I'm contracted through Sprayberry is one of the oldest schools in Cobb County in the state of Georgia. They've been around forever. Really, a lot of historic people coming through there. So they're on very, very solid financial footing, and they contract me individually. It's great because while I miss doing wind band occasionally, that was going to be that was what I intended to do when I went and got my degree and stuff. But I like being able to only focus on the percussion program. It makes it to where I don't have to split my focus, so things don't fall. It's easier for me to keep pace with it. We have about 29 percussionists, basically.
Oh, wow.
This coming year, I think we might be 31 this coming year. So it allows me to spend more time individually with those kids, since I don't have to worry about the band part of it all the time. So it just allows me to kind of catch them up, get them to where we need them to be. When they walk in the door, basically I can assess what's lacking, and I get to quickly get them to where they need to be.
So let me open this up to any one of you guys who want to answer this question. But this is typically an issue with music educators that maybe aren't percussionists, that are the only middle school band director. They've got maybe 2 concert bands that they have to deal with, and we all know the answer to this question, but for somebody that may be watching, that may be trying to learn, how important is it to reach out and find a percussion specialist, even if it's only once or twice a week, if you just have a little bit of money? How important is that, Scott?
I think it's huge, to be honest with you, for the kids' interest and just engagement, because there's only so much that you can do with especially middle school percussion literature. The kids aren't playing enough to be engaged like a flute player or clarinet player would be. Even if they're playing the warm-ups and doing stuff during class, just working on the music doesn't really give them that opportunity. So I think, if once a week bring somebody in to do percussion ensemble with them, do something where they get to play the melody and they're the focus, huge. Any way you can do it.
Yeah. So so Kevin, you're a band director
Yes,
as well. So you have a lot of duties, I'm sure, before, after school, everything with not only the percussion program, but also middle school. Like, do you go down to the middle school and teach the percussion? Is that your primary focus?
Well, not as much as I would like to. My high school band, because I'm an assistant band director, there's 2 of us there. The head guy is he's originally a trumpet player, but good with all winds, and I consider myself, I guess, a full band director as well. So with that comes class periods at the high school where I just can't make it over the middle school, and the fact that we don't just have a dedicated feeder, we actually have 2 that it's like a percentage. I'm sure it's the same. So like 70% from one, 20% from the other. So I try to go over equally and at least get in there for the percussion testing, and then the first month I try to get over there 3 or 4 times a week. But with what you're saying about hiring out, I encourage that with my feeder programs more than anything. Now it's easier said than done because there's not that many people that can go into the classroom in the middle of the daytime and have time for that. But as much as me having time and it lining up with my schedule and not leaving my high schoolers, just with my head director, having to, do a class of 60 something and all by himself, I get over there mostly at the beginning of the year.
So when you're not over at the middle school and you're at the high school performing those duties, is somebody working with the percussion, or is that music educator just with everybody?
That music educator is with everybody.
Okay, so that's interesting. So that's a totally different kind of philosophy than you have, right? Because are you at the middle school teaching those percussionists all the time, or Dickerson?
Well, I'm also a band director.
Right.
So I do have responsibilities with the winds, but I'm very fortunate I can spend a lot of time with percussion. So we have percussion class every day, and in 7th and 8th grade, I usually have what we call the advanced percussion class, which is where some kids can actually take percussion 2 periods. And, and those kids get to do, it's kind of crazy, they get to do some more advanced percussion ensemble stuff. We do mostly technique types of things and large ensemble pieces in the main class. In the advanced class, those kids do some advanced percussion ensemble stuff for middle school. They play with the jazz band, because we do jazz during school too. They play with the full symphony orchestra, which I don't think there are too many middle schools that have that opportunity.
No.
And they play with the other concert band. So those kids get to do a ton of stuff in that class. But most of the time I'm in with percussion, and then usually it's kind of the same as him. We get together with the winds a few days before the concert. And I actually start that. It's kind of interesting. I start that in 6th grade, and it's kind of a trial by fire, type of thing where I give them the music the Friday before their first concert. I'm like, okay, here's your music, and I give them some websites and some resources, and I'm like, okay, because I figured out a few years ago, I don't know if you guys have this experience, but I realized that at some point that the kids were not going to lift a finger as long as I kept giving them all the information.
Interesting.
And because when I was a kid, I had to drive somewhere to take a lesson.
We didn't have
absolutely. We didn't have
Yep.
the internet. We didn't have any of these resources.
Yep.
And you had to work to learn. And these kids were just sitting on their tails waiting for me to hand them everything.
What's the next thing?
So my teaching philosophy, if anybody wants to know, is don't teach. So I give the kids resources, and tell them, okay, this weekend you go home, learn the music, because it's way easier than what we've been doing in class.
Right.
You go home, and I want you to use these resources. You're going to come back on Monday. You're going to teach the class what you learned about how to play crash cymbals, how to play triangle, how to play tambourine, how to play bass drum. And once you've shown me that you've made the effort to learn, then I will tell you how I want you to do it.
Interesting.
But I make them do that step first.
I love that.
And then Tuesday, they're in with the band for the first time, and I tell them, every year kids cry at the end of this rehearsal because you're going to think you're prepared. You're going to think, you're going to practice it until you can play it. And when you get in with the winds, even though it's just quarter notes, when you get in with the winds, and we say, okay, percussion by yourselves, and everybody turns around and looks at you, you're going to get nervous, you're going to start messing up.
Yep.
And I said, it's never as good as you think it's going to be because you never prepare as much as you need to. And every year at the end of that class, there's a couple kids in tears, and I'm like, okay, who thought they were prepared? All these hands go up. Okay, who still thinks you're prepared? All the hands go down.
Right.
So it's like, okay, tonight you fix that. And usually Wednesday, it goes just fine. Thursday, have a great rehearsal, perform Thursday night. And that's kind of my
And that's it, yeah.
introduction, that when I give you music, when I give you something and say, learn this, you actually learn it. You don't just practice it until you can play it. You practice it until you're not going to mess up.
Right.
And so that's kind of my first thing. So, like, long story to come back around to, we don't spend a whole lot of time with the winds, And the kids by 7th and 8th grade, or even by the second concert in 6th grade, they understand it when I say, here, learn this, go home and practice this. Or come into school before school, whatever.
Right.
And usually before those concerts, I've got a room full of kids, 8 o'clock in the morning, coming in working their tails off because they know, that they are responsible for coming with their music prepared. So
Right.
that very first opportunity is my chance to kind of prove a couple points to them, make sure they understand this is the process, this is what you're going to do, and after that, man, it's really pretty smooth sailing.
Well, Kevin, let me ask you this because this is interesting. What Scott was just talking about, like he has a very fortunate situation where there's a lot of opportunities for kids. Mm-hmm. Which, before I ask you this question, let me ask you three. Scott, those kids have so many wonderful opportunities for percussion in the middle school, and it's all during the school day. So, how does your district do it when you have, like, there are so many music educators that say they took jazz band out of the middle school curriculum now, and all these kids need to take more AP courses to get ready. Like, how do they have enough time during the day to do their other classes?
So we have what's called connections. We have 2 connections classes during the day in the middle school that the kids take, and this was actually a very cunning / proactive move that we made. After Hurricane Katrina, I think it was, when they did the reduction in force, the rifting, we lost a couple of connections teachers. And when we lost those teachers, me and the other director at the time, John Palmer, were like, okay, well, how can we spin this so that we don't end up teaching general music? So we went to the administration and said, because the thing is, the school was getting bigger. We had 2 fewer teachers, so the PE classes were going to be like completely overburdened. Yeah. So we went to them and said, hey, we want to help. And said, because before that we were team teaching classes. And we said, what if, in order to take the burden off, we allowed students to take 2 band classes so that they could be doing double percussion, we could do jazz band, and kind of double things up. And of course, at the time, the administration was like, please, yes, thank you. So we just kind of spun that. It's a ton more work for us, but it's the work we want to do.
Of course.
So to your point, though, we're both in Cobb County,
right?
And I believe it's somewhat the same for Kevin over in Fulton. But so everything we do at the school, scheduling, all that, comes from the administration. The county doesn't have a uniform way to do it. So like some schools are on, like we're on block, which is awesome for band. I love it. I see them an hour and a half every day. Some schools are on the traditional 7-period day. Some are on modified block, all kind of different stuff. So with us in Cobb, a lot of it, like you were saying, how do we do that? Because I'm the same way. My kids don't go into the band class.
Right.
It has to do with the administration and the directors. For me, they're the ones that make those decisions, and we're lucky enough to have. I know you've got a whole old band room. That's your percussion room now, right?
It's an old computer lab.
Old computer lab. We got a new band building like 10, 11 years ago, and we have a massive ensemble room in it that's almost as big as most people's band room. So I have the facility to be able to take them out of class.
Kids,
and before that, we used to take them into the theater. We found a way to do it. But that's when you were asking how do we do that, a lot of it is just we have administrations that will allow that to happen and directors that see the value in it. Because there are, there's different opinions with different band directors who want their percussion kids in the class every day.
Right, absolutely.
And they don't see the value in because that's all of our percussion ensemble stuff that we do is during the day. We only have 3 or 4 after school rehearsals when we're trying to combine. Since I have 3 classes, we do 3 percussion ensembles. But sometimes for personnel, I need 2 classes together. So we'll have like 3 or 4 rehearsals after school to do that. But if we didn't, I just wanted to make sure I was recognizing the admin and the directors that allow that to happen, because it's not that way everywhere.
Well, it's not, and I tell you, you know, where I live in Columbus, like that, you know, it's a strong band community, marching band, high school, middle school, and it is so hard for the administration to understand. Like, everybody just thinks like, you know, Cobb County, you know, well, it's in the water, you know, and it's like, no, it's not. Like, they've done something to set it up to make it that way, and you know, so for me, Kevin, like, I'm curious with these 2 lucky guys that get to see the middle school kids a lot, and you know, you only get to see them that first month. Your program is obviously not lacking when it comes to the high school, like the way those kids play.
Right.
You're doing it the way like 90% of all the other middle schools are that don't have a percussion specialist. What are they doing over there? What is your team doing over there to keep them engaged and keep percussion going?
Mostly working out of method books and taking little things that I've given them and just encouraged. And they do a couple percussion ensembles a year. But to combat that and like to bring them into the high school realm, I make every 9th grader, no matter what, if they're all-state players or whatever, they have to be in a 9th grade percussion class. Because I'm pretty particular about how I like to do things.
Sure.
And how I want the performer to play certain things, and that's just how I am. So I make every single 9th grader come in, and we do a lot of what typically, like, I'm sure Scott would go over in 6th and 7th grade. We'll go over that, and you know, I'll teach them pretty much every way to do something, and then let them mold their skills from there. And then I'll you know, because there's many different ways to play different instruments correctly. So, you know, I'll teach them pretty much every technique, and then let them grow individually and kind of keep that creativity up, because that encourages them to go on to do different things and not just be so delved into technique that they get bored with music. So
Right. So talking about going back to the middle school and thinking about your overall situations at all 3 of your schools, when does your program start introducing? We all know how important private lessons are, right, to a kid's growth and to his energy and into the craft of playing percussion with all the instruments they have to learn. You know, I used to say all the time, like, it's, you know, Susie gets to come to class and she just opens up her trumpet and she plays one instrument. You know, percussionists have to learn so many different instruments in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade to get introduced to it. Private lessons are a huge thing. When do you guys start introducing the idea to most importantly parents about like private lessons? Is it day one?
I encourage it at the testing. I at 6th grade testing, I'm like, yeah, and if you want to really get ahead and have some fun, then here's these 2 people, and then, you know, I'll give the contact information. And if they seek it out, I'm not gonna hammer it home to that 6th grader, but I'll definitely encourage it to them. And the middle school directors do a great job of, you know, emailing out contact lists of different private lessons. But that's just where I'm at.
Interesting thing. So when I started at Dickerson 20 plus years ago, we had 3 or 4 really good private teachers in the area. So I pushed it like crazy. I had probably 80% of the kids taking private lessons.
Oh my!
Because we had one, you know, Carrie Clear used to come to one of the kids' houses. They had a marimba set up, you know, and the kids would just go. They would eat dinner with the family and all that stuff. This was like a revolving door. So I had her, and then, you know, she moved away. A couple different people moved away, and I still was pushing private lessons. But I started realizing that these kids were paying to go to like a music store, sit down and jam with somebody with a drum set, because parents were asking me, should they be practicing? Should they have music? And I realized that it was just wasting the parents' money. So that's the thing, you have to have good private lessons. So I just stopped for years, and now we actually have a private lessons program, you know, running through Walton. We have a couple other really good teachers. So I've gotten in the past couple of years where I'm pushing it again. But, you know, for a long time it was like, you know, these parents are wasting their money, and I'm actually having to fix more stuff that they're learning, you know, with some of these teachers that are just, you know, just teaching, you know, rock, you know, out of school. So it's kind of a, you know, a slippery slope. You got to have good teachers, and like you said, you know, give them the information. This person, you know, will do total percussion. Right.
It's the same kind of thing. Like in my early days, I used to teach private lessons as well as do the stuff at Spraybird. I was at Kevin's school for years, and as I got older, I just
It gets daunting after a while.
I mean, once you do it for 12 years, it's a lot. You know,
Right.
when you're going over the same material all the time. But the same kind of thing Scott was saying. There's good people around now, and at Sprayberry, we've actually lost. We don't have a lot of kids doing private lessons anymore coming out of COVID. And I can't really blame them. I mean, I know some people, I don't want to talk bad about people that make their living off
Sure.
Zoom lessons,
Sure.
but I don't see a ton of value in Zoom lessons, to be honest with you.
Right.
You can get some stuff done, but you know, the tactile response of playing with somebody or somebody who's right there to talk to you about something you're doing from a phrasing perspective or a technique perspective, it just doesn't exist really with Zoom. So the kids we did have taken, the new class coming in, because here, I know it's different all around the country, we were basically didn't do anything much for 2 years. It was tough for us to get anything to do. So it's just now coming back, and I've just started doing the same thing they're saying. I've made a whole list with 4 people that I trust, and I'm like, here, this is who you need to be talking to.
Yeah.
Trying to steer them towards someone who's going to give them good information, because we have a lot of, and I don't want to talk bad about all of them. I'm sure there's some fine musicians that are at some of these stores and whatever. But like Scott said, a lot of it is unstructured, I guess.
Yeah.
There's not really a goal structure for what they're doing. They're just so I tell the kids all the time, and I'm sure everybody says this stuff. I drill it with my kids. There's a difference between practicing and playing.
Right.
You know, playing, you're just having fun, you know, enjoying music, because that's
Right.
what it's about. Practicing is you're working on something you're bad at
Right.
until you get good at it. And a lot of those places around, I think it's more of a playing. They're having fun in there, just kind of playing the drum set or whatever. And, you know, there's some value in that, but it's just not the same as focused,
Right.
you know, ideas that are getting presented. So just to kind of piggyback on that, I'm doing the same thing at Sprayberry now, coming out of COVID, trying to set them up with people around here that I trust. And we're lucky enough now that we have some good guys in the area that are very, very competent.
And
Yeah.
I'm curious about this. Are they allowing private lesson teachers to come during school?
We are, again, that's an administration thing.
Yeah, because we're fine with it right now. I was just wondering about it.
Each administration in the county does it. Like my wife is a teacher as well, and I still can't even go see her at lunch. They don't want anybody to come in during the day. But our administration has kind of relaxed the reins here at the end of last year, going into this year. So we're trying to set that up now at Sprayberry, so that instead of the kids, I don't know how you guys do it, but with me and where I'm at, it's way easier for me to get a teacher to come to the school, and then they do it at the school after
Sure.
school, as opposed to parents trying to get them and drive them to wherever they have to go. So we're in the process of getting that squared away for this coming season or coming year.
Yeah, and I know that's been a huge thing in Texas for, you know, Kevin, you taught in Texas and went to school there. You know, it's a huge thing where they started to allow like private lesson teachers during the school day. You know, they'd get them FBI, BCI background checked and everything, and they would come in and teach, you know, those kids during the day. And so when I moved back to Columbus in 2014, and, you know, some of the, you know, music educators that I won't mention on here would ask me, like, what are they doing in Texas? And I'm like, look, they're doing kind of the same thing at Mason High School in Ohio, where they're bringing in college students and people that play with a, you know, Cincinnati Symphony, and they're bringing them in during the day. So, and this is a guy who, I think he has his PhD now, so he went through and he researched it, he put together PowerPoints, he went to his administration and put this together and said, look, we'll have them FBI, BCI background check, they're going to be teaching in our practice rooms, you know, blah, blah, blah. And he said the administration looked at him and said, well, what are you doing if we bring in 3 or 4 private lessons teachers?
Yeah.
And he just looked at him and he said, I'm teaching the other 86 kids in the concert band. Like,
Yeah,
I'm just
that's what
asking
I
to
meant
pull
earlier.
Susie out to play flute. You know?
A lot of directors and stuff, they don't understand the value in specialized, you know, instruction.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I mean,
And the big thing is, to me, it makes so much sense because parents aren't having to go out again after they've been working all day, you know, to take their kid at 7:30 or 8 o'clock at night to a private lesson. It's like, well, I just take my private lesson on Tuesdays during band class, you know, or something like that. So I think the private lesson thing, to me, in my experience, is huge. You know, any chance to get, I was happy to see, like, right away, because there's a lot of people that are like, no, I like the 6th graders just to kind of like not take lessons their first year, and it's like, why not get them learning
Right.
right away? If the parents can afford it, like get them private lessons.
Yeah, and even if it's 30 minutes, maybe twice a week, or even 30 minutes one time a week. I know band directors, or some band directors, I'll say, are worried about that solo player being out. Like you're playing something very important, and it's two weeks before LGPE.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, they're out. But if you're like, okay, well, we'll do hour lessons at the bookends of the year, and then we'll do 30 minutes, and then if the private instructor can kind of schedule that, then it's kind of less daunting towards that band director that's worried about their one day rehearsal. Because some band directors will get in and be like, where is it? Where's that cymbal crash? And oh, they're in a lesson. Okay.
Well,
Okay.
what we did at Walton because we've got a brand new facility that we opened right at the beginning of the pandemic, of course. So when we were designing the facility, it was designed with private lessons in mind, and they created what's called the Walton Music Institute, and where the boosters hire private teachers to come in to the facility. We've got like the percussion room that's set up with timpani, drum set, 5-octave marimba,
Yeah.
snare drum, accessories, all that type of stuff. But it's all after school. But if a kid's taking private lessons, we have marching rehearsal, from 5 to 8 on Tuesday, and they've got a lesson at 5:30. At 5:30, that bass drum number 2 walks to the sideline, puts their drum down, goes up to the band room, does their 30-minute lesson, hour lesson, whatever, comes back.
Fantastic.
And that was something we did when I was teaching at Lassiter years ago too. You would just see a kid, trumpet player go to, walk to the sideline and,
Time for my
do their
lesson.
And the mentality is that kid's going to be a better musician, by the end of that 30 minutes, that hour, than they would have been with that same 30 minutes or that hour of marching band rehearsal. So yeah, you're missing that part, you're missing that hole, but the kid comes back better than they would have been, standing there cleaning drill or whatever it is we were doing, because of that individual attention that they couldn't have gotten. So, I know a lot of people are kind of like, he was saying that they're kind of hesitant to lose that kid for their overall rehearsal, but understanding that mentality that kid comes back better from that 30 minutes of time than they would have been if they were in that rehearsal.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it might have hurt your overall ensemble a little bit, but
For
not
about
really.
18 seconds.
But not really. Yeah, not really, because that kid comes back as a better player.
Right.
So I think that's kind of an important message to send to people.
Yeah. So with just kind of wrapping up a little bit of the middle school kind of philosophy and strategy that you guys use, what are your benchmarks? Like 8th graders getting ready to go into high school, all 3 of you, like what are your benchmarks that you want them to have under their hands? Like, should they have a great understanding of how to play a thumb roll on tambourine? Is it as specific as that, or is it just like be able to play all your scales, major, minor, or what?
Well, for me, like I said, I don't get to interact. I'm more like Kevin on how I get to interact with the middle school, just because between Kennesaw and other stuff I do, I don't have as much time to go over there. So for me, since I know what I'm going to need to do, I need solid core fundamentals in counting and being able to play in time.
Sure.
Right? And I need them to have at least a basic understanding of how to approach both the keyboard and the snare drum. I can get everything else. I can get into timpani with them. I can get into thumb rolls. I can get into all that, because we don't have, so for my, same as Kevin was saying, we have 2 feeders for me. And they split. One we get 100% of, and one we get like 20% of.
Okay.
The one we get 100% of, they don't currently have a percussion person coming in. I think that'll get remedied this next year. But when we do have someone, I chat with them a lot, and I'm like, look, I want you to go through whatever you want, but I need this when I get them. I need them to be able to count off the page. They understand rhythmically what's going on. Now, past that, if there's icing on the cake, I do like for them to understand a little bit, just touch on the instrument, understanding how to. So I'm a big believer, and I'm sure everybody else is too, everything about percussion and music in general is about the sound that you generate. Mm-hmm. Now, the technique facilitates that, right? It leads you to that.
Sure.
But if they can understand that what the sounds that they're trying to make have to be, idiomatic of that instrument, then that makes it way easier for me. Let me give you an example. So if the kid wails on a snare drum when they get to me, that I don't.
Right.
I have to go back through
You're
now
not
and break
helping,
that down
right.
and go. That's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to make this thing sing a little bit.
Right.
Or one of the big things that I have to spend a lot of time on is playing cymbals.
Yeah.
Because they don't get it. Like their suspended cymbal roll is not a characteristic sound that we're kind of going for most of the time.
Yeah.
So if in the years pre-COVID when I've had people there, I try to talk to them a lot about, let's do it in this priority. Like make sure they can count, make sure they can play, right? They can move their hands, whatever. But now after you get to that, we have very specific information that we give them. Like they'll work on suspended cymbal rolls. Back in the days before COVID, they would spend their time on that, trying to understand the differences between rolling on a 16-inch cymbal compared to like a 20.
And hand speed,
all that stuff,
okay.
the type of mallets they're supposed to use. That's another big one too that I like for them to do. I like for them to have, so if you don't have a percussion person there, the experience is not going to be the same in terms of how much time they're getting to play. But I do like for them to have knowledge, like what kind of sticks are you supposed to be using in band class? Are you supposed to be using your 5/8 nylon tips on that snare drum for a concert? What kind of mallets are you supposed to be using?
Is there a resource out there that
I've made
you
one.
use? Okay, you have one. Okay.
So I have a whole list.
So for $19.95, you can buy Allen's
I just give it to them and I'm like, here's a list of if you're going to play marimba, you don't use your plastic acrylic mallets on the marimba.
Sure.
So if in the absence of experience, somebody there like playing with them all the time and teaching them, I try to give them basic knowledge so that when they get to me, I'm not having to sort out a bunch of
right. Well, you're kind of hitting on something I want to get to right after this.
Okay.
But I'm because I think you just hit on something great. Scott, what about you? Like when they go up to the high school, like what are the benchmarks that you want them to have?
So before I get into the benchmarks, I will say that everything is built off of what he was just talking about, and this is something I think is important for band directors, because I think a lot of band directors look at percussion and they're almost afraid to address percussion because they're thinking, well, I don't know the technique. I can't play that for them. I can't show them or talk to them technically about what to do. You don't have to. And that's the number one thing I teach the kids to begin with is, again, I teach them by not teaching them. So the number one thing is use your ears. Listen to what's going on. Pay attention to what your body feels like when you're playing it. If it doesn't sound pleasant to you, it doesn't sound pleasant to other people. And you need to think about what is causing that to happen. Is it tension? Is it too much velocity? Is it the wrong implement? And you need to be able to go through and analyze and think about those things. Eventually I'll tell you, but I want you to go through that process. Band directors can do the same thing. And they can listen to the kid and say, okay, does that cymbal roll sound harsh to you? Okay, well, it sounds harsh to me too. What can you do to address that? And the kids, when they have, I think, that kind of creativity, they get ownership in what's going on.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing for me is getting the kids to understand how to make great sounds and be good musicians. And that's like the biggest thing. The technical stuff, they're not going to be good technicians coming out of middle school. They're not going to have chops coming out of middle school. That stuff will happen in high school. But if they understand how to listen and they understand how to pay attention to the sounds, and they can think about balance and blend and all of those types of things. And when people, see our percussion ensemble, for example, I don't know that people are ever looking at us going, man, those kids.
Technically, they're amazing, right?
They always talk about how musical the ensemble is.
Right.
So that is probably the number one thing that I'm looking for.
And that's a great takeaway for band directors that aren't percussionists to understand. Like, you're right. Like, they can't go back there and necessarily teach them how to play a pat a flaw flaw, but like they can teach them, like, hey, can you be aware of like how you just played that snare drum or how you just played that concert drum?
And we've had some amazing percussionists come out and work with the percussion ensemble. Dickerson, Moulton, Lassiter over the years, all that stuff. And we tend, a lot of times, percussionists, we tend to talk in terms of technique, or used to, talk about heights or talk about, what kind of mallet to use. And I brought in John Culverhouse, who was one of the directors at University of Georgia one time.
Yeah.
And he was like, well, don't you want to bring in Dr. McCutcheon, the percussion teacher? And I was like, well, we've had him in and he's amazing. I wanted to get your perspective.
Interesting,
And Alfred Watkins used to do the same thing at Lassiter. He would come in, and they would say, "Can I get a brighter sound out of the bells?"
Yeah.
Whereas we would say, "Go get such and such mallet," and the kid has to sit there and think, "Okay, what can I do to get a brighter sound?"
Yeah.
And I think that
I think
that
that's a good
freedom,
point, though.
that freedom for band directors to talk to percussion with the same musical terminology that they do to their winds, and then leave it up to the percussionists to try to figure it out. So I know that's kind of a tangent of what you were asking. But
No,
I just think that's so
great.
important. From a director perspective, to talk music and not worry about the technique
Right.
aspect of it. As far as benchmarks, it changes every single year. And that's totally dependent on the kids, because people will ask me what my curriculum is. Well, every group's different.
Yeah.
This year, this was the strongest 7th grade I've ever had. Coming out of
COVID.
And I don't know how it happened, but it was just kind of ridiculous. I do a thing called, we do sticker charts. There's something about middle school kids.
I love it.
You put up sticker charts.
Even in a digital age, they still love stickers.
High school kids love stuff.
High school, yeah.
Yeah.
There's something about those stickers, and I'm a big fan of competition.
Yeah.
I like competing for parts. I like, the kids, they kind of drive from that. But we put up sticker charts, and at the beginning it's like, okay, well, here's the 40 rudiments, and I have some specific, it's not just like slow, fast, slow, it's like some specific things for each of the rudiments. And I have the 12 major scales, and then we've got a few other exercises added on. Sometimes I have accessory things on there. And this year, the 7th graders, it was just like 12 major scales, and we learn, I think, 6 different scale patterns that are all addressing different techniques and different skill sets that we work on, and they're all applied to each of the 12 major scales. And I teach them how to form scales, tetrachords, talking about the shape of the scale, how they're put together, all that stuff. And we learn like C, F, B flat together. And then after that, it's like, okay, well, now you know how to build any scale. So start on G,
Figure it out.
Figure it out. And, I'm not going to teach you the rest of them. We'll do them, but you're going to learn that type of thing. And the kids at that point, they're off on their own. And it's like, okay, well, I can learn this faster than so and so. And they're counting up stickers. And this year it was like, shoot, okay, so there's this other thing called minor scales.
Yeah.
Because they just filled up the sheet.
Yeah.
They thought they were done.
Yeah, and it was like, here's how you figure out your minor scales. So, if you know your major scales, you already know your minor scales. Like,
right.
You've already learned them, and then it was like, oh, okay, kiddos, there's another thing called natural and harmonic.
Yeah.
And it was like I was constantly having to play catch up to what they were doing. But I mean, in general, knowing their scales, knowing, we learn how to hold 4 mallets at the end of 6th grade.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a prerequisite for holding 4 mallets. It's not like you have to be perfect at this.
Right.
So I teach them how to hold 4 mallets. We start working on 4 mallet technique in 7th grade. Basic rudiments type of thing. I'm more concerned with stroke types and understanding how to play full stroke, downstroke, or whatever you want to call that, upstroke. So when we're learning rudiments, it's like, okay, the accent pattern helps you determine what types of strokes you're going to use. So like paradiddle, down, up, tap, tap, down, up. And I want them to understand what the stroke types are, more so than being able to play the stickings or the rudiment.
Right.
Figure that aspect of it out. We do drum set, so we have an electronic drum kit that the kids rotate through. We've got a list on outside every day during class. The next kit alphabetically goes in. We've got the Mark Wessel's drum set.
Yeah.
They get the electronic kit, put on their headphones, and they just kind of keep track of their progress as they go through it. I think that has helped us a ton. It's amazing just that drum set coordination, and the kids are always like, well, I'm not coordinated enough to play drum set. And it's like,
You'll figure it out.
Yeah.
you do it, you're going to be fine. And that has helped us a ton in terms of understanding of time.
Yeah. Well, and it's
so-
interesting too, Scott, because I forget who I was just talking to a couple weeks ago about this. Like, there is I don't want to call it an epidemic, but like there's a real problem with drum set, like, is gone a lot of places. Like I did a clinic a couple of years ago, and there was, like 250 kids there. And I just asked, like, how many kids, have a drum set at home? And there was like 7 kids. Like when we were growing up, like every one of my buddies that was in the drum line, we all had drum sets and we all played. And I think it's probably due to, there's a lot of cool snare pads and tenor pads you can buy now, and there's a lot of things on the internet, stuff like that. There's not a ton to do.
And not to go way down this rabbit hole, but kids have way more distractions now.
Yeah.
Like I realized so every year when my kids come in spray bearing, I do a poll on who can ride a bike.
Right.
This past year, only 40% of the kids that came in could ride a bike.
No kidding.
And I try to be, I'm critical sometimes. I'm an old man, so I'll be critical about in my day, but see, I didn't have all those distractions.
Right.
So I try to think about that when I'm talking to them, like they have so many screens and they can, when I communicated with my friends growing up, I saw them at school and that was it. We all had one phone line at the house. You couldn't monopolize it because your parents needed to use a phone.
Yep.
But now the kids are in constant communication with each other through Discord and text and WhatsApp app and all that other stuff. So I think that plays into that why there's not as many kids playing drum set, to be honest with you. Because that was my distraction. That was my iPad growing up.
Me
like
too.
I had the drum set and I would go down to the basement, put my headphones on, listen to Rush and try to play. That was what I did. But now they don't have to do that.
Right.
They have so many other things that distract them. So that's been one of the things I've really been trying to focus on the last. And I like the sticker thing, how it still works for you guys, because I've tried over the last 10 years. I spent a lot of time motivating and making them understand how fun percussion is, to get them off those devices to do something else.
Well, yeah, and that's super important. Let's do this before we wrap up the middle school thing. Just real quick and basic, like the one question I get from educators all the time that I'm so blessed to be in a job where I get to work with educators all the time. Their number one question is, I'm not a percussionist. I've got my middle school program. Like, what cymbals do I need? So, usually I can spit some stuff out, but I don't have the opportunity to talk to every educator. For the people that are listening, like, how many pair of crash cymbals should a normal middle school band program have? Should they be 16-inch? Should they be 18? Should they be thin?
I mean, I think you should have, of course, multiple pairs, but at least a 16 and an 18.
Right.
Whether it be 16 French, 18 Viennese, something not super heavy, because there's always going to be those smaller kids. Like when I go introduce proper how to hold crash cymbal technique, I get kids just drooping down to the ground, even at the high school level. So I feel like even with sounds you'd want for marches or anything like that, just being able to teach the kid a technique, you have to have different sizes and different weights.
I mean, for me, I know when I first started at Dickerson, I got we had a set of 18-inch, I guess it was probably Viennese at the time. And symphonic Viennese or Viennese cymbals is probably what you're going to want weight-wise for your general cymbal, 18-inch. And I went and bought a 20-inch pair of cymbals that we could never use because the kids could never hold them.
Right.
So those actually end up at Walton most of the time. So I mean, it's usually, we have an 18, that is kind of your general thing. And then for marches or something really light, we have a 16, I think it's a Viennese also type of cymbal. But I think, for pretty much everything middle school, you can get by with a 16 and 18.
Now, would that be almost the same for most of the general literature that middle school bands are playing for suspended cymbals? Should they have just one suspended cymbal go to, or should they have a darker one, a brighter one?
I would say at least a darker one and a brighter one.
Yeah.
And one, for example, I mean, we don't get too loud in middle school, obviously, but it's a pretty common thing to hear cymbals just being overplayed. When you can, start rolling on one cymbal and add another cymbal in, it kind of broadens and darkens the sound, gives a little bit of texture as it builds without distorting things.
Sure.
So I'm a big fan of having two cymbals side by side. So you have, do you think a darker cymbal would sound better here, or a brighter sounding cymbal?
Well, I love going into middle school programs, and the director said, hey, can you listen to the percussion in this piece? And I'm like, yeah, sure. And I'm like, do we have another suspended cymbal option? And they're like, yeah, Joey, get the other suspended cymbal. And Joey comes back with a ride cymbal from the drum set.
So I was about to say.
And I'm
Or
like,
a crash
not
cymbal
quite.
from the drum set.
Yeah.
Well, to go on what you said, I like that concept too, because it goes back to what we were talking about training them to be musicians, right? So, I think suspended cymbal rolls are situational. Even when I write for people, I'll even tell them sometimes something different. Because if it's a suspended cymbal roll that's going with this woodwind phrase, you might want it to be a little different than when the full band is playing later, and
Right.
it needs to be heavier or darker. And that's another one of those things when you're talking about the director can talk to them like, we're going to use this cymbal because it's brighter, because it's a little lighter, and they can start to understand that it's situational as
Right.
opposed to just, and they also start to understand the care on how much care you have to put into the sound. Because like you say, they'll just grab that ride cymbal from the drum set
Right.
and pull it out there, and you're just like, well, that's not going to
Well,
work.
as a middle school band director, you have, like, let's say you have 60, 80 kids. Like, it's not always possible to go back, like, look and make sure that that's not a 20-inch ride or an 8-inch.
Right.
So, like, I encourage my middle schools to actually have a suspended cymbal, because a lot of people are putting it on cymbal stands and like, okay, well, that can be confusing, but if you see a gooseneck back there with that one suspended cymbal or two suspended cymbals that you have options for,
They'll know.
then the kids are automatically like, and then also the director sees the gooseneck, it's like, there we go.
Yeah, one of the things that I've been finding a lot around the country is a lot of middle school programs are using the lane system. Have you guys seen this? Like, they set up their concert band from the podium. There's like a lane, and they could get back to the percussion section in about
we do that.
5 seconds, and they can actually talk to them about this and that, and so that's always a good system.
Well,
So,
can I talk real quick about possibly one of the most important aspects of suspended cymbals?
sure.
The quality of the cymbal is super important, but it does not matter if you have the absolute best, artisan, cymbals suspended. They're not going to sound good if you don't have a cymbal sleeve and a felt.
Right.
Yeah.
And
You don't like that rattle of
That's like the
Or a gooseneck.
That's why I encourage that. That's why I encourage that, because
the number of times that I go out to a clinic with somebody, or I'm seeing groups at LGPE or whatever, which is our band festival,
Right.
large group performance evaluation, and I'm just looking over there, and you see that metal on metal, and the cymbal stand is going to be a stronger quality or stronger density, hardness, I
Right.
guess, of metal than the cymbal is. So eventually, that stand's going to win, and you're going to crack your cymbal.
Yeah.
But I see it all the time where that's just not part with my kids too. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
always constantly having to getting on my kids going, there's not a sleeve on that.
Right.
and those get lost so fast.
They get lost.
That's
in
a
the
whole other discussion on how those get
yes. Train your kids when they take the cymbal topper off the screw, they take the cymbal off, immediately put the topper back on. That's the number one thing. But that's probably the biggest thing I see.
Yeah,
It's
products in middle school.
Well, I've several band directors. I've sent them a link. Like, here's a whole kit of felts and sleeves you can buy. It's not much. It's like
I've ordered
$20
it for a couple of years just to make sure I've got them on
Yeah.
hand, because they are going to get lost. Even
Yeah.
with my kids that I preach, that they have to pay attention to this, they're going to lose those.
Yeah, it's kind of like triangle beaters.
And
Same
see, that
thing.
goes back. That goes back
That's
to
black
That's how I do
that goes back to the care that those middle school percussionists have to learn about their instrument. Because it's not like if you play clarinet, they teach you like, well, you got to swab it all the time. You got to do this, and they try to teach them to take care of it. That gets lost a lot in the percussion part of it. When you look over and they've got their backpack sitting on the timpani or something like that, no one's like taught them like you have to take care of this stuff because they don't buy it generally.
All right, cool. So, guys, thank you so much for everything you do for Sabian and everything you do to kind of just propel percussion, education in your communities. It's a huge thing. Like, you all have different, values of your program and how much you work with the middle school programs and the high schools and stuff like that. It's just something that's very near and dear to me from an education standpoint, that we have amazing educators like you guys, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for everything you do for Sabian. Maybe we can put something together that, like, if some educators out there that aren't percussionists need some resources, is that something maybe that you're willing to,
absolutely,
kind of do? And then maybe we could put that on. We're coming out with a new website here in probably the next month. It's gonna launch, and it's gonna be great. And we also started the new Sabian Education social media sites, which is going to be geared towards percussion educators and music educators that aren't percussionists. So this is kind of like the first foray into that, basically. So maybe that's some material that we can put up every once in a while, like, hey, this is what Alan uses for his 6th grade snare drum class, and this is what Scott uses, and this is what Kevin uses, and maybe we can kind of spatter that stuff up there, and just to do what we can to help educators that maybe aren't as lucky as some of your programs to have somebody like you there. So thank you for everything you guys do, and hopefully there'll be more of these coming soon. But thanks so much, and check out Sabian Education on Instagram and Facebook, and thanks so much, Drew Tucker, who's over here in the shadows, like helping us out and making sure all this stuff sounds amazing and looks great. So thank you guys for everything.